Hey, tonight we slip past the flickering torchlight and into a hidden doorway carved into sun-baked limestone. You feel the heat of the desert behind you, the cool breath of death ahead. Before your eyes can adjust, the scent hits sweet resin. Bitter natron, a strange metallic note like old coins in blood. You're entering a place few living ever saw and even fewer understood. The air is thick with reverence and rot. Welcome to the house of eternity, where the dead waited to become gods. You're not alone. Hooded figures in linen robes shuffle past, murmuring incantations under their breath. These aren't priests of Osiris or noble mourners. They are the Weti, the embalmers, guardians of the secret art of preserving the dead. They nod at you but say nothing. You're here to learn, not to speak. The walls around you are daubed with faded red sketches, diagrams of the human body, outlines of sacred tools, prayers in ancient glyphs, candlelight dances across polished obsidian blades and bronze hooks, hanging from pegs like surgical instruments in a forgotten operating theater. Every tool is named, consecrated, forbidden to outsiders. And here's your first bold fact. The art of mummification wasn't static, it evolved over 3,000 years. It wasn't just one method, but dozens. Think of it as a macabre iOS update that took centuries to beta test. Some mummies were better preserved than a vacuum-sealed steak. Others, well, imagine leaving a lasagna on your windowsill for 4 millennia. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Press the notification bell to update many new videos. And while you're at it, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you lying in bed in Jakarta at 11:03 p.m.? Or maybe bundled on a couch in Toronto at 4:14 a.m.? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch next to a slab where a young scribe lies, his skin tight against bones, blackened from the resin but still somehow recognizably human. His mouth is open as if caught mid-sentence, and someone has painted his lips crimson with ochre. He's beautiful in a haunting way. One of the embalmers gestures to the tools laid beside him. A curved obsidian blade rests atop folded linen. This, he rasps, is where it begins. There's nothing casual about embalming. Each act is ritual. The embalmers are not mere morticians, they're artists, doctors and priests rolled into one, operating within a divine system. Every movement honors the body as a sacred vessel for the Katha life force, the Batha soul's personality. Unless both were kept safe, the dead risked becoming restless, hungry ghosts. And here's the thing, mummification wasn't universal. Not everyone got the deluxe spa treatment. Only the wealthy, powerful, or devout could afford it. Poorer folks, wrapped in reeds, slathered in crude oils, buried in desert pits. Ironically, some of those natural sand burials preserved bodies better than gold-filled sarcophagi. Nature's low-budget miracle. Historians still argue whether the earliest mummies were intentional or just really lucky. You follow the through a narrow passage where clay jars line the walls. He pauses, running a finger over the name Ayufa, etched in flowing hieroglyphs. A high priest, he says. We embalmed him over 70 days. His heart was so pure it glowed under the moonlight. Then he smirks, shrugs. Or maybe that was the oils, who knows? Even the location of the House of Eternity was a secret. Often built just outside city walls, far from homes and temples, these workshops were hidden to protect both the living and the sacred dead. The work was dangerous not because of disease, but because touching the dead was taboo. The man who made the first incision, the sahetip, was often pelted with stones, symbolically, of course, usually because his knife defiled the divine image. He'd literally slice open a god and then go sprinting like he'd just knocked over the kings. Wine. There's humor in the horror, isn't there? Imagine being trained for years in anatomy, ritual chants, toolwork only to have your co-workers chase you with rocks the second you clock in. Still, there's no joking in their eyes. These men carry reverence in every fold of their linen. You notice now how clean everything is. The walls scrubbed, the tools glinting, the jars sealed with beeswax. Even the floor is swept. Cleanliness is the soul's gateway, one mutters. And just like that, the room shifts from creepy to sacred. In the corner, a clay tablet shows a scene in relief. Anubis, jackal-headed god of mummification, bending over a corpse. He holds a curved blade in one hand and raises two fingers in the other, inviting you in. This is the God we serve, your guide whispers. He taught us the art. Without him, the dead would forget the way. You look again at the body. The painted eyes stare back. There's no fear here, only silence. And in that silence, a kind of awe. You feel it settle over you like dust. This is a threshold, a crossing, a story that goes beyond bones and bandages. So now you kneel. The next lesson begins. You stay kneeling longer than expected, not out of discomfort, because the air itself feels heavy, almost sacred. The embalmer before you has begun tracing a symbol in the fine dust with his finger, a spiral, one of the many signs representing the soul's eternal return. You must understand, he says slowly, we don't preserve the body for vanity. We preserve it because it is the anchor. Anchor to what? To that, he simply smiles and stands. He leads you to a small side chamber, the walls coated in soot from decades, maybe centuries of oil lamps. Above you, painted in ochre and cobalt, floats the image of a giant winged goddess, Nut, stretching across the ceiling, swallowing the sun each night and birthing it again each morning. They believed, the embalmer murmurs, that death was not the end, but a passage, a voyage through darkness toward rebirth. It all begins with belief that the soul is not one thing, but many, Ka, Ba, Ok, Ren, and Shut, and all of them need the body to remain intact or at least recognizable. Without a proper shell, the soul would wander, hungry, thirsty, mad. And here's a fun twist. It wasn't just the soul's comfort at stake, it was also the family's. If a person didn't make it safely into the afterlife, they could come back to haunt the living. You'd wake up with snakes in your bed or frogs in your bread. So embalming wasn't just a holy duty. It was self-preservation for the still breathing. You step closer to a cartouche painted on the wall. Inside it, symbols spell out a name. Neferhotep, a nobleman, rich, connected, occasionally insufferable. The embalmer grins as he recalls. He requested a beard of silver thread and a tiny gold amulet of a duck, claimed it would make him charming in the afterlife. The Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife the way modern people obsess over Wi-Fi passwords or skincare routines. You had to get it just right. One wrinkle in the process, one misspoken prayer, one skipped offering and, poof, eternity was a bust. That's why mummification wasn't just physical, it was spiritual performance. Like preparing a spacecraft for a journey through a dimension where time doesn't exist and your guide speaks only in riddles. You didn't want to show up unwrapped, smelly, and soul-fractured. So what happened when you died? First, your body was washed in palm wine or river water laced with myrrh, depending on your budget and social clout. The washing was both hygienic and symbolic, a cleansing of the worldly life, a kind of death baptism. The feet were scrubbed carefully. The dead walk into judgment, the embalmer explains. It's best they don't track dust into eternity. Then came the prayers. You lay in state while priests chanted hymns from the Book of the Dead, the Amduet, or the Book of Gates. These texts were like travel guides for the soul. Here there be serpents. Avoid the lake of fire. Make sure to compliment Ra before sunrise. And no joke, these books were often illustrated with terrifying monsters and intricate maps, like Dungeons and Dragons, but with actual stakes. Historians still argue whether every person received the full spiritual treatment. Did farmers get the same incantations as pharaohs? Some say yes, at least in theory. Others believe class always crept in. The poor got a skeleton crew of blessings, while the rich floated into the afterlife on a cloud of incense and backup singers. As you listen, a sudden thud echoes from deeper within the workshop. You glance over just a linen bundle being dropped onto a wooden plank, another body fresh from the tomb. But your heart still lurches a little. The embalmer notices. You get used to it, he says with a shrug. We're not dealing with death, we're preserving life. The real kind, the eternal kind. He hands you a wooden amulet roughly carved, shaped like the Eye of Horus. Protection, he says. You'll need it if you want to follow the whole journey. You pocket it and walk with him into the deeper halls. There's a low hum now, like a chant too soft to hear. It vibrates in the bones. You pass alcoves where wrapped bodies rest in various stages, some still soft, others crisp and lacquered. One is wrapped in dark linen and daubed in thick resin. An important merchant, the embalmer notes. He wanted to smell like frankincense for all eternity. We obliged. Some customs seem alien, others oddly familiar, like the desire to leave a legacy, to matter after you're gone. Whether it's a name in lights or a perfectly preserved body buried with your favorite dog, humans cling to some version of forever, and yet sometimes forever wasn't enough. One pharaoh demanded his tomb be betrayed, another bribed priests to curse his enemies' mummies with misfortune. You think your sibling rivalry is bad? Try squabbling over eternity. As you reach the central chamber once more, the embalmer pauses beside a stone basin. He dips his hands in and lifts them, water trickling through his fingers like threads of silver. All of it, he whispers, depends on what you believe happens after. That's why we preserve, not for today, but for the journey to come. You look again at the slab, now empty. The scribe's body has been moved, preparations begun. You feel a quiet pool of curiosity, not just about how they did it, but why. What fears, what hopes made them go to such lengths? You'll get answers, but first the incision must be made. The tools are already laid out when you return. Bone needles, flint knives, bronze hooks, linen strips folded with geometric precision. A shallow copper basin sits nearby, its bottom lined with date wine and something that smells suspiciously. Like antiseptic, but sharper, like scorched honey. Don't flinch, the embalmer warns. This is the part people usually don't want to see. He's talking about the first cut. The body on the table this time is older woman with long grey braids, still twisted with beads of turquoise and faded lapis lazuli. Her skin has tightened. In death, her hands crossed over her chest like she's waiting politely. You can't help but notice how peaceful she looks, even as the priest draws a chalk line from sternum to hip. This act, simple as it may seem, was among the most charged. Opening the human body was considered deeply taboo in ancient Egypt. In fact, the man who made the incision, the periscists, was ritually cursed and often symbolically attacked by his colleagues immediately after. And no, that's not an exaggeration. Imagine being a trained mortuary specialist, prepping your surgical tools for the day's work, only to get pelted with rocks the second you slice open your first rib cage, all part of the job. You watch as the priest recites a low chant in Old Egyptian, then gently raises the flint blade. No fancy scalpels, here just razor-sharp obsidian, the same volcanic glass used in early brain surgery and sacred rituals. The blade hovers, then sinks into the flesh with eerie ease. There's no blood, of course. That's already been drained. What remains is dried muscle, delicate membranes, organs now shriveled like old fruit. But it's the motion that gets you. Slow, deliberate, respectful, as if the priest were unlocking a sacred text. Rather than performing dissection, you lean in. Inside the body, a symphony of sinew and color. The lungs, collapsed but leathery. The liver, discolored and brittle. The stomach pouch, twisted like an old coin purse. All of them soon to be removed. Here's your mainstream fact for the night. The ancient Egyptians believed each organ had a spiritual purpose. That's why they didn't just toss them out. Each one, except the brain, we'll get to that, was preserved in its own jar, guarded by a deity. The liver went to Imseti, the lungs to Hopi, the stomach to Duamutef, the intestines to Kebesat. Their jars were topped with heads, human, baboon, jackal, falconich, staring wide-eyed into eternity. But not everyone got the deluxe organ packing. Some were just stuffed with sawdust or rags. Others were pickled like olives. One noblewoman in the Ptolemaic period allegedly requested her organs be marinated in cedar oil and honey. Historians still argue whether this was part of a fringe mummification style, or just the world's most glamorous marinade. Either way, the process had purpose. Once the initial incision was made, the surgical ballet began. One man removed the organs, another rinsed them in palm wine and natron. A third began prepping the canopic jars etched with spells from the pyramid texts, meant to guard the contents from decay and demons. At this point, your embalmer hands you a clay jar. It's heavier than you expect. The top is shaped like a falcon's head. You feel it, he asks. That's the stomach. Wrapped in linen, blessed by words, still sleeping. You try not to drop it. The organs were dried for days, sometimes weeks before being sealed. And not all of them went into jars. Sometimes the embalmers would return them to the body, wrapped and positioned carefully, like packing a suitcase for someone's most important trip. A few mummies have been found with their stomachs full of resin-soaked linen bundles, shaped like hearts or even animals, like weird spiritual souvenirs. But the real drama wasn't with the guts, it was with the one organ that caused the most debate, the heart. Sometimes it was left in, sometimes removed, sometimes substituted with a stone scarab carved with sacred spells. Why? Because the heart was believed to be the seat of emotion, memory, morality, not the brain. Definitely not the brain. The heart was the organ judged in the afterlife, weighed against the feather of Mat, one embalmer, centuries after the old kingdom, allegedly cried when he realized a royal body had been accidentally buried without its heart. How will he stand in the hall of truth? He wept. He will be eaten by the devourer. The devourer, by the way, was a chimera with a crocodile head, lion's body, and hippopotamus legs. Basically, the ultimate cosmic nope. If your heart failed the test, you didn't get a retry. You got devoured, soul deleted. Game over, so. Yeah, you can see why everyone freaked out about organ placement. There's a moment of silence now, as the last of the woman's insides is removed. Her chest cavity looks hollow, almost bird-like. The priest bows his head. She is empty, he says softly, ready to be filled with eternity. You step back. The incision is being sealed not with thread, but with a blend of hot resin and linen wads packed tight like insulation. It smells like pine smoke and tar. The cavity will be filled later, but for now, the body rests, quiet, hollow, waiting, and somehow she still looks dignified. You glance at the obsidian blade again, now resting on a white cloth, cleaned, consecrated, the tool that opened a door. No one alive can pass through. The embalmer notices your gaze. That was just the beginning, he says. Next, we go up the nose. You try to brace yourself, but there's no gentle way to put this. It's brain time. The embalmer leads you to a different slab where another body waits. This one is already opened, the organs gone, cavity packed. Only one essential extraction remains. Most people assume we leave the head alone, the embalmer says, lifting a long bronze rod with a tiny hook on the end. But no, the head holds the most stubborn piece of all. He holds up the rod between two fingers, like it's an everyday toothbrush. It's called a cranium hook, and it has one job, fishing out the brain, not through the mouth, not through the eyes, through the nostril yap. It's as horrifying and effective as it sounds. The technique: slide the hook up through the nasal passage, punch through the thin bone of the ethmoid plate, scramble the brain like an egg, then drain it out the nose or let it drip down the back of the throat and out the mouth. Your modern instincts scream malpractice, but the ancient Egyptians, they thought the brain was glorified stuffing, a cooling agent. Some even called it head mucus. The real soul lived in the chest, remember. Heart equals character. Brain, meh. Historians still argue whether every mummy received this treatment. Some skulls show careful drilling and removal. Others have brains fully intact. And in a few cases, get ready for this, brains have been found, cooked like actual brain jerky, possibly from embalming errors, or maybe intentional resin pickling, gone wrong. Either way, it's very crunchy, very cursed science. You watch as the embalmer inserts the rod into the nasal cavity of a young man. There's no ceremony this time, no prayers, just efficient motion. Twist, twist, twist. A low crunch, then the head is tilted forward, and ... drip. A dark fluid trickles out, thick and slow. You grimace. You'll get used to it, he mutters. Or not. The next step is rinsing the skull, sometimes with palm wine, sometimes with natron, or even cedar oil. The goal is to leave the head cavity clean, dry, and hollow like a wellaed tomb. Occasionally, embalmers stuffed it with linen or hot resin to hold the shape. If not, the face would sink. And no one wants to look like a deflated melon in the afterlife. There's something oddly surgical about it all. The tools are primitive, but the precision is not. These embalmers had centuries of practice, passing down techniques from master to apprentice, whispering tweaks and improvements like secret recipes. The embalmer offers you a small, clay-headed anatomical model, smooth and featureless, with a tiny removable cap. Inside, a replica of the brain hook and the swirling paths through the sinews. We used this to train the novices, he says, before they practiced on goats or prisoners. Prisoners, you ask. Not officially, he grins. But sometimes. The dead arrived early. You try to laugh. You don't succeed. Of all the steps in mummification, brain removal is perhaps the most misunderstood. It's not just gross, it's symbolic. Emptying the head meant erasing the distractions of earthly thought. No hunger, no jealousy, no fear, just a clean mind, ready for rebirth. You kneel beside the young man on the slab. His face has been pressed gently to one side. His features are calm, almost boyish. He was a musician, the embalmer says. Flute player for the Temple of Bastet, loved figs, terrible gambler. The embalmer smooths a cloth over the man's forehead. He believed the gods would let him play in paradise, so we preserve his hands, too. See, you look, the fingers have been individually wrapped already, each digit separated by linen and soaked in resin. It looks like he's wearing gloves of golden bark. The embalmer turns serious. It's not just anatomy, he says. It's memory. Every cut we make, every piece we remove, it's done so the person can find themselves again after death. There's a fringe theory he brings up next, one that few historians agree on, but which has surfaced again and again, that some elite mummies were prepared with partial brains left intact, especially those believed to have psychic or divine powers. Was this reverence, insurance, or superstition? No one knows for sure. Some evidence shows priest-kings buried with delicate skull incisions, suggesting the brain was accessed but not completely removed. Perhaps a tiny piece remained, a sacred fragment of thought, like an offering, like a flame, or maybe, the embalmer chuckles, they just forgot to finish. You watch as the skull is sealed with resin. It hardens like glossy tar, preserving shape and deterring bugs. Then, linen padding is gently inserted through the nostrils, not for aesthetics, but to prevent collapse. Like a tent pole for the face, the embalmer turns toward you, hands on hips, looking proud. No one gives enough credit to the nose work, he says. We're ancient Egypt's plastic surgeons. You snort. The humor doesn't last long. Behind you, a gong sounds, and distant. Another body has arrived. The cycle continues. As the embalmer washes his hands in scented water, you realize something. This isn't about keeping bodies pretty. It's about giving people a shot at eternity with dignity. Each strange, surgical, sometimes squishy step has meaning. The Egyptians didn't fear death, they just refused to let it have the final word. You take one last look at the young musician. His face is clean, expression serene, no brain, no sorrow, just silence, and soon it's time to open his chest. You return to the slab, just as the embalmer lifts the ribcage open with the delicacy of someone unlocking a puzzle box. The cavity is a dark hollow now, fragrant with natron and faint traces of old cedar oil. All the major organs are gone except one. The embalmer gestures for you to come closer. Nestled in the center of the chest lies a wrapped bundle, no larger than your fist. It looks like a dried fig, wrapped in linen and sealed with dark resin. The heart, he whispers, or a version of it. You blink, wetter version. Here comes tonight's scholarly debate. Was the heart always preserved? Tradition holds that it should have been left in place, since the heart would be weighed against the feather of mat truth. And justice during the soul's judgment, too heavy with sin, and you were tossed to the devourer. Just right, you joined Osiris in the field of reeds. blissful, eternal, and supposedly mosquito-free. But archaeology tells a murkier tale. Some mummies have no heart at all. Others have it stuffed back in the wrong spot. Some have scarabs in its place, engraved with protective spells. And in at least one infamous royal mummy missing heart, mangled torso, resin overload. Researchers still argue whether it was a botched embalming or a political punishment. You watch as the embalmer lifts the bundle and unwraps it with slow fingers. Inside is not a heart, but a carved piece of polished stone, green, speckled with gold. A heart scarab, symbolic replacement, he says. If the original couldn't be saved, or stolen, you ask, remembering rumors of ancient tomb. Robbers, he shrugs. Same outcome, we do what we must. He places the scarab gently into the hollow chest and presses his palm over it. May your heart speak truth, he recites. May it not rise against you. The cavity is then filled not with the original organs, but with a blend of linen, sawdust, resin, and spices. Think of it as divine insulation. Cinnamon, myrrh, crushed acacia, sometimes even dried flowers. There's one theory, somewhat fringe but irresistible, that certain priests snuck in personal items, love letters, prayers, even jokes written on linen strips. Eternity's first mixtaps. And here's the quirky Partenians. Yes, you heard right. Several mummies, particularly in the New Kingdom, have been found with onions stuffed in their eye sockets, ears, chest cavities, and, well, places. No one agrees on the reason. Was it symbolic? Unnatural. Preservative. A priest's idea of a snack for the afterlife. Historians still argue whether it was part of a regional ritual or just embalming improvisation. One body had an entire onion garland wrapped around its neck, like a holiday wreath, festive, funky, unforgettable as the body is stuffed and stitched closed with linen thread. The embalmer nods with satisfaction. Now he is whole, he says, not with what he had, but with what he needs. You glance back at the resin-sealed heart jar sitting nearby. It's still warm to the touch. There's something intimate about this process, not sterile or mechanical, but deeply personal. Even with all the tools and rituals, it still feels like a farewell between friends. And that might be the greatest paradox of mummification, for all its complexity. It was also an act of love. One last favor for the person who can no longer ask. One last attempt to keep them from being forgotten. You lean closer to the musician's face. His skin has started to harden from the natron. His lips, slightly parted, seem to whisper something, but it's just air. The embalmer wraps the chest with a protective layer of waxed linen. We seal him, he says. The heat of life has left, but now he is prepared. The room grows quiet again, and you take a breath. This is the midpoint. Body is empty, the purification nearly complete, but the real transformation is still ahead. Resin, wrappings, amulets, incantations, all waiting in the next room as you stand. The embalmer hands you a clay figure, a small ushabti, arms crossed, holding tiny tools. His servant for the afterlife, he says. When Osiris calls, this one answers in his place. You turn the figure in your hand. It's worn smooth by time, the glyphs barely visible. But the message is clear. You don't journey alone. The embalmer extinguishes the oil lamp and gestures for you to follow. He'll rest here tonight, he says. Tomorrow we begin the drying. You glance back once more at the still form. On the slab, chest sewn, head empty, body packed, peaceful in its silence. The transformation isn't gruesome, it's sacred, and far from finished. Outside, the night wind rustles through date palms, the stars blaze overhead. You think of that stone heart lying quietly inside his chest, waiting to be judged, and just maybe hoping to be forgiven. The air changes as you enter the drying chamber. It's colder, drier, and smells unmistakably of salt, sharp, earthy, with an edge like scorched limestone. The light here is dimmer too, filtered through slits in the high stone walls. You feel it immediately. This is a space of waiting. In the center lies a wide stone trough filled with a pale, grainy substance. At first, you mistake it for sand, but when you step closer, your fingers brush across it and you realize it's not ordinary grit. This is natron, Egypt's miracle salt. It is the breath of the desert, the embalmer says, his voice reverent. What preserves the land, preserves the flesh. Natron, in case you're wondering, is a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate. Basically, it's ancient salt on steroids. Found in dry lake beds, like those near Wadi Natron, it was scooped in baskets, purified, and used for cleaning, cooking, medicine, and most importantly, preserving the dead. Here's your mainstream fact: mummification wasn't possible without natron. It drew out moisture from the body like a sponge in fast forward, halting the rot and leaving the skin leathery, shriveled, but intact. Without it, no mummy would survive the centuries. The body now hollowed, rinsed, and stitched is gently laid in the trough and buried in natron like a patient entombed in snow. Every fold of skin, every fingertip, even under the tongue. They don't miss a spot. The embalmers press the powder into the body's creases with linen-wrapped paddles, whispering as they go, "This is where we wait," your guide says. 40 days, sometimes 70. No more, no less. The dessert takes what it needs, leaves what is eternal. The drying phase is long. The embalmers monitor, daily checking for moisture, refilling natron, inspecting the nose and toes. Some embalmers mark the days with scarab-shaped tokens. Others rely on gut feeling and a little superstition. You ask what happens if the body is removed too soon. The embalmer just smiles darkly. Let's say you wouldn't want to unwrap that gift. In one corner of the chamber, you spot a failed mummy, half preserved, dark patches spreading across the torso, insects sealed inside like amber. A rushed job, he says. High official. Paid extra to be done early. Sometimes haste buys you nothing but rot. Historians still argue whether different regions had unique drying durations or recipes. Some suggest northern embalmers used saltier natron. Others believe wealthier individuals received multiple natron cycles. One fringe theory posits that elite priests underwent reverse drying with periodic rehydration baths to keep the skin flexible. Strange, yes. Proven, not quite. But the ancient Egyptians did love their mystery. The embalmer picks up a small clay pot and lifts the lid. Inside is powdered natron mixed with fragrant herbs, juniper, myrrh, and something sharp like mint. Sprinkles it on the linen bundles beside the drying trough. It is for the senses, he says. The soul still smells. This wasn't just science, it was sensory art. The Egyptians believed the senses carried into the afterlife. They painted tombs with music scenes, brewed perfume for burial, even packed favorite foods with the body. A dried duck, a handful of lentils, a loaf of honey bread. There are even mummies buried with beer recipes scratched into lineage just in case heaven had a homebrew shortage. You glance again at the drying trough. The man buried in natron lies still, almost peaceful, as if sleeping under a strange white snowfall. You can see the skin beginning to tighten, the lips pull back from the teeth. The embalmer notices your gaze. Soon he will look like himself again, he says. That's debatable. There's a quiet moment as you move to a bench where small natron effigies sit. These were used to test purity. If the effigy, often shaped like a frog or a cat, began to decay, the natron was discarded. But if it dried cleanly, the embalmers used it for the real work. Quality control, ancient style. A cat mummy rests on one shelf, perfectly preserved, its little head wrapped with extra care, ears perked under linen folds. Temple offering, the embalmer explains. Thousands were made, some fake, some real. You can never tell which is which. Indeed, modern CT scans have revealed animal mummies containing nothing but feathers, bones, or even pebbles. Shrines were packed with them. Supply and demand. Imagine walking into a temple with a box of mystery meat and saying, "Yes, this is definitely a sacred ibis." Historians still argue whether these empty mummies were deliberate or scams. Maybe they symbolized the animal rather than contained it. Or maybe someone just cut corners. You run your hand through a basin of unused natron. It's coarse, yet soft, cold, but dry. It clings to your fingers like dust that never wants to leave. You wonder what it must have felt like to lie in that trough for 70 days. Time ticking slowly as your body transformed. Was it peaceful, terrifying, boring? The embalmer breaks. Your thoughts. After the drying, he says, comes the sealing. The scent, the wrappings, but the hardest part is waiting. The soul must linger nearby, watching. You glance once more at the body in the natron, still preserved. Patient, he's halfway between life and death now. A man paused in time, his skin crackling like parchment, his story not yet over. The next chamber awaits. The oils are warming. The wrappings are ready. Soon this man will become a mummy. The drying is complete. 70 long days have passed in stillness, in salt, in silence. The body has changed. Where once there was soft flesh, there is now skin like tanned leather, thin and taut over bone. Fingers that once played music or held children now curl like ancient scrolls. Lips drawn back, nose collapsed, eyelids sunken into hollows. And yet, he looks preserved. Not alive, not quite dead. Suspended, the embalmer brushes natron from the body with a soft fan made of reeds and feathers. He is ready for scent, he says. You follow him into the preparation chamber, a room of perfumes, pastes, and sacred oils. Stone bowls line the walls, each filled with mysterious substances that shimmer in the lamplight. The air is thick, with fragrance, frankincense, myrrh, lotus oil, cedar resin, and hints of cinnamon and cardamom. It smells like a temple crossed with a spice market. You lean over a bowl of golden paste, beeswax and pistachio oil, the embalmer says, lifting a wooden spoon to soften what the desert has hardened. The embalmer begins the next stage, the anointing. He dips his fingers in the fragrant oils and massages them gently into the corpse's skin. First the forehead, then the cheeks, down the arms, across the chest. The oils sink in slowly, restoring a subtle sheen to the dried flesh. The body must be pleasing, he says, not only to the gods, but to the soul itself, so it will recognize where to return. You never thought of it like that, the soul coming back like a traveler seeking a familiar face. This stage wasn't just cosmetic. These oils were antiseptics, moisturizers, and preservatives. The embalmer explains that each oil had purpose seat to purify, myrrh to calm, frankincense to invite divinity. Some even had insect-repelling qualities. Practical magic. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. The wealthy sometimes imported perfumes from as far as possibly modern-day Somalia and even India. One high priest's mummy was discovered slathered in lotus paste imported across deserts and seas. He must have smelled like a divine bakery. Once the oils are applied, the next step begins. Resin coating. The embalmer lifts a copper bowl of black goo over a small brazier. It bubbles like tar, filling the room with a sweet but slightly choking scent. Think burnt maple syrup with a vengeance. This is bitumen or senegar, the sacred divine pitch. He uses a ladle to pour it slowly over the body, across the chest, down the limbs, into the joints. It hardens almost instantly into a protective shell. The sound it makes, tiny crackles like drying leaves, makes you shiver. Some mummies were dipped entirely in this resin. One priestess from the 21st dynasty was found blackened head to toe, her features sealed beneath a half-inch of glossy armor. Scientists who later studied her remains were stunned. Her bones were pristine, her teeth still white. But resin wasn't without risk. Overdo it, and the body might collapse from the heat or weight. There are cases fringe, but re-love mummies, literally melting into their coffins due to resin overload. It's embalming meets lava bath. Not ideal. Historians still argue whether these thick coatings were meant for preservation, protection, or symbolism. Some believe it was to emulate Osiris, the black-faced god of the dead. Others think it was just ancient, more is better thinking. You watch as the embalmer paints the final brushstrokes over the ears, the fingertips, the soles of the feet. These parts speak and feel, he says, even in death. Next comes gold leaf. Only for the wealthy, of course. Your musician wasn't royalty, but he had friends. The embalmer unwraps thin sheets of gold from a linen bundle, so delicate they flutter when he exhales. With tweezers, he lays them over the man's fingernails, toenails, and lips. He played love songs. The embalmer smiles. Let his mouth shine with them still. It's strangely moving, even more surprising. Some mummies have been found with gold inside the body, gold tongues, placed in the mouth to speak with the gods. One mummy in Alexandria had not one, but two gold tongues. Historians still aren't sure if he stuttered in life or just wanted to bargain harder in the afterlife. Once the body is sealed and scented, it's dressed in its under wrappings, simple. Linen tunics are pulled over the torso, a belt, a sash. He must be dressed with dignity, the embalmer says, before we wrap him for judgment. The linen is no ordinary cloth. Some strips are dyed with henna, others inscribed with spells in red ink. A few are cut from sacred temple curtains, repurposed from the walls of the gods. You lift a strip and feel its weight, soft, ancient. Strong. Tomorrow, the wrapping begins. But for now, the musician lies still, cloaked in scent and resin and quiet dignity. You look at him not as a corpse, but as someone in transition, a soul mid-journey, a man between songs. You ask the embalmer one last question. What happens if someone doesn't get this treatment? He pauses, then their soul wanders. He says, unrecognized, forgotten, and nothing is colder than being forgotten. He draws a linen sheet over the body, snuffs the brazier, and says no more. in the hush. You smell the last traces of frankincense and fire. Tomorrow, the bandages will whisper their own stories. Dawn glows pale across the limestone walls as the embalmer lights a fresh brazier, its smoke curling like ink in water. Today is the day of wrapping, the moment when a dried, perfumed body is transformed into a mummy, something between art, devotion, and time capsule. You step into the wrapping room. It's warmer here, comforting, almost. Shelves of folded linen line the walls, each labeled with tiny glyphs indicating size, thickness, or type. The scent is no longer sharp. Resin, but something softer: dried linen, beeswax, aged incense. The body lies ready, anointed and dressed in its undergarments. Its skin now darkened by resin, its fingers golden tipped, its heart scarab nestled in the chest like a silent oath. You feel a hush in the air, like the moment before a curtain rises. The bandage is not a cover, the embalmer says. It is a scripture. He unwraps a long strip of linen, runs it through a bowl of warm oil and resin, and lifts it like a ribbon from a dancer's hand. The wrapping begins one limb at a time, the right arm first, each finger wrapped individually, then the whole hand, then the arm, then the left. Legs are done the same way, all with whispered prayers. Protect his walk in the field of reeds. May his fingers grasp eternity. And here's your mainstream fact. Egyptian mummies were wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen. In some cases, particularly among royals and high priests, it could exceed 3,000 feet. That's nearly a kilometer of fabric, wound layer by layer over hours, sometimes days, and with every layer, another chance for magic. You lean in as the embalmer pauses to press something between the wrappings: a tiny blue-glazed beetle, numbered, bigger than a coin. Amulet of regeneration, he says. Like planting seeds in a field of cloth. Each layer has its talismans. A jed pillar near the spine for stability. An eye of Horus over the throat for protection. A knot of Isis over the heart. The embalmers don't just wrap the body, they seal it, like weaving a spell in layers of fabric and resin. And here's the part that gets really wild. Some embalmers sang while they wrapped. Historians have found temple fragments describing wrapping ceremonies where linen was applied to a chant with precise rhythm and meter. Imagine it: a team of priests, winding cloth while humming prayers that echoed through the stone halls like a funeral lullaby. Fringe scholars even claim certain melodies were believed to activate the amulets hidden between the folds. The embalmer chuckles. We didn't all sing, he says. Some of us hummed. Some just talked to the dead. I once worked with a man who told jokes as he rapped, said laughter kept away the demons. You wonder if the musician lying here would have liked that. There's a pause as the wrapping reaches the face. This is the delicate part. The embalmer uses thin linen strips, scented with cedar oil, to cover the features without erasing them. We don't hide the face, he murmurs. We preserve the memory of it. He smooths the linen over the eyes, then the mouth. The result is eerie familiar contours beneath gauze, like a sleeping figure glimpsed through fog. Then comes the golden mask, or, in this case, a painted shroud. Royalty received elaborate gold death masks, like the famous one of Tutankhamun. But the musician isn't royalty. Instead, the embalmers press a plaster and linen face panel onto his head, painted in red ochre and black ink. Wide, staring eyes. A faint smile, a hint of music in the brushstrokes. It's strangely beautiful, And yet not all mummies were treated so tenderly. Some show signs of wrapping errors, limbs twisted out of shape, heads dislocated, even bandages applied upside. Whether through haste, inexperience, or indifference, mistakes were made. One fringe case discovered in Deir el-Bahari revealed a mummy with 2 right arms, a botched job, a ritual symbol, or just very ambitious wrapping. Historians still argue whether these oddities were overlooked or intentional, but here, in this chamber, it's clear that care is sacred. Every fold is intentional. Every whisper matters. The embalmer begins the final layers. These are wider strips, overlapping like scales, coated in resin as they go. They harden quickly, forming a shell. The air grows thick with the scent, sweet, pungent, ancient dot, and finally, the linen is sealed at the feet with wax, stamped with the sign of Anubis, the jackal-headed god, who guards the dead. The mummy is complete, but the ritual is not. The embalmer picks up a reed, brush, and writes on the outermost layer of linen the musician's name, his parentage, and a short prayer. Let his name be spoken, he says. Let his song not end. There's one last touch, a strip of linen tied around the chest, with a red-painted tie-it, the knot of Isis, a symbol of rebirth, of protection, of love. You feel something unexpected, then tenderness. This isn't a horror show. It's an act of devotion, a bridge between worlds, stitched in cloth and sealed with song. The embalmer steps back. He is no longer a body, he says. He is an offering, a vessel, a memory made solid. And indeed, the mummy no longer looks human. Not exactly, but not alien either. It looks sacred. As the brazier burns low, the embalmers lift the body gently onto a wooden board. It's ready for its final rites. For now, it rests, but soon it will speak again. The preparation room feels emptier without the body, just the lingering scent of resin and oil, linen scraps on the floor, and the soft crackle of the brazier winding down. You follow the embalmer into the ritual chamber larger, echoing its walls carved with prayers in looping script. This is where magic meets memory. The mummy now lies on a carved cedar bier, propped slightly as if reclining. A thin shroud drapes his wrapped form, painted with protective images. Anubis kneeling, the scarab rising, the eye of Horus blazing over the heart. It's not just decoration, it's insurance. Each symbol carries a spell. Each color speaks. To the gods, we now awaken what was wrapped, the embalmer says. The spirit has waited long enough. The air changes. A priest enters, bare-chested, draped in leopard skin, shaved head reflecting the lamplight. He holds a scroll-thin papyrus, fraying at the edges. The Book of the Dead. Not one book, actually, but a sprawling collection of over 190 spells, personalized. For each individual, protection against scorpions, snakes, decapitation, drowning in the Duat Egyptian underworld, or saying the wrong name to a celestial doorman. Like an afterlife, Dungeons and Dragons rulebook, just with much higher stakes. The priest begins to read. Spell 125, the weighing of the heart. The room darkens as if listening. The embalmer joins in, murmuring. The mummy lies, silent, eyes sealed. Under linen and paint, heart scarab resting just above where his chest once pulsed. Do not let my heart rise against me, the priest chants, before the tribunal of the gods. Then, from a corner, another figure approaches, holding a ceremonial adze shaped like an animal's foreleg. This is no ordinary rite. This is The opening of the mouth ceremony. Here's your mainstream fact. The opening of the mouth was one of the most important funerary rituals in ancient Egypt. It symbolically reawakened the senses of the deceased so they could breathe, speak, eat, and see again in the afterlife. Without it, the mummy was just a husk. You kneel and watch as the priest raises the adze and gently touches it to the mummy's lips. Then the eyes, then the chest. Awake, he whispers. Breathe, rise. A mixture of incense and oils is wafted over the body. Bread and beer are placed nearby. Offerings of roast duck and fruit-real food for a symbolic appetite. The dead are nothing if not picky diners. Here's the fringe theory for tonight. Some scholars believe the opening of the mouth wasn't purely symbolic. They point to evidence that tiny incisions were made, that certain mummies have resin-packed mouths, or inserted reeds to prop the lips. Could the dead actually whisper through magical means? Some embalmers believed so. Historians still argue whether the ceremony was ever performed on the lower classes or only for the elite. Some graves show signs of simplified rituals, while others were buried with full ritual kits, suggesting widespread desire, even if not always executed with perfection. You glance at the items now placed on and around the mummy, a small mirror for reflection, kohl for the eyes, a carved ivory comb, a reed flute, yes, a flute. He was a musician, the embalmer reminds you. Let him carry his song. The room feels thick with meaning. You notice the subtle details. Painted stars across the ceiling to guide his soul. A false door on the far wall, so the spirit may come and go freely. A small statue of Osiris tucked into a niche, green-faced and watching. You lean closer to the mummy. His face, now covered by the painted shroud, gazes outward in eternal readiness. No longer just a body, no longer just a memory, a vessel for the soul. Suddenly, a gust of wind rustles the linen drapes over the doorway. You turn, but no one is there. The embalmer smiles. He has begun his journey, he says. Sometimes they say goodbye. Sometimes they just go. You don't ask what he means. The priest extinguishes the incense. The scroll is rolled up. The bier is lifted again. The mummy resting like a pharaoh in waiting. There's still more to do, coffins to paint, tombs to prepare, but this ceremony, this was the soul's spark. You linger a moment, looking back as the body is carried down a hallway of flickering torchlight. The silence he leaves behind isn't empty, it's full, like a final note held just a moment longer than expected. And then, gone. In the quiet, the embalmer presses a small item into your palm. A wax figure of Anubis. You'll want this, he says. The next part isn't just holy, it's dangerous. You close your fingers around it. The mummy has been purified, dried, wrapped, scented, and awoke in Dodd. Now it's time to bury him and seal the deal with the gods. The sun hangs low as you step outside for the first time in days. The Nile shimmers in the distance, slow and golden, while flocks of ibis wheel through the evening sky like pale ghosts. But you're not walking toward the river. You're following a procession winding its way into the desert. Before you, 6 men carry the musician's coffin, a long, narrow box, painted with protective symbols and bound in ropes. Atop it rests a carved mask, its inlaid eyes staring skyward, lips closed in serenity. Behind them, priests carry incense, torches, food offerings, and clay jars. It's not a paradise, a funeral caravan. Burial is not a moment. It's a ritual. The embalmer walks beside you. He'll be buried near a shaft's tomb, he says. Not as grand as a royal crypt, but it's deep, safe, and faces west. Always west, toward the land of the dead. In Egyptian belief, the west was where the sun set, where life ended and the soul journeyed into night. So all tombs, regardless of class or cost, were ideally pointed in that direction. Orientation mattered. After all, no one wants to wake up in the afterlife, facing the wrong way as the procession moves into the valley. You see tombs carved into the cliffs like honeycomb. Some are grand colonnaded and inscribed. Others are modest pits covered with limestone slabs. One is painted with scenes of harvest, music, and dancing. That's how he'll want to be remembered, the embalmer says, as he lived, not as he died. Here's your mainstream fact. Most non-royal Egyptians were buried in shaft tombs, vertical pits dug into the bedrock, sometimes over 20 feet deep, leading to a single burial chamber. The body would be lowered in by ropes, the chamber sealed with rubble or bricks, and the shaft covered over. It wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. The descent mirrored the soul's journey into the duat. You arrive at the musician's tomb, its humbler, shallow shaft tucked beside an older burial. Nearby, the sand is strewn with broken pottery and faint footprints. From other funerals, the embalmer says, even the dead have neighbors. The priests form a circle. The coffin is placed at the tomb's edge. One lifts a jug and pours water from the Nile in a slow circle around the shaft purification. Another lights a cone of incense and waves it toward the sky. The scent of frankincense mingles with the desert wind, and then the final words are spoken. May your name be spoken forever. May your body rest unbroken. May your soul find peace in the west. The ropes creak as the coffin is lowered into the earth. You peer down into the shaft. It's tight, cool, lined with mud brick. At the bottom, the coffin settles beside a basket of food, a jug of beer, and a bundle of linen containing his reed flute. No gold, no treasure, but everything that mattered. And here's tonight's quirky tidbit. In some tombs, embalmers would bury letters from living relatives to the dead. They asked for protection, forgiveness, or sometimes revenge. One letter, written to a deceased mother, begged her to stop haunting my dreams and breaking my pottery. Another promised weekly offerings if she would curse the neighbor's goats. Historians still argue whether these letters were ceremonial or meant to be read by the spirit itself. But given how seriously Egyptians took names, memory, and words, it's not hard to believe they expected answers. The shaft is sealed with stone slabs and daubed with mud. A small stela tombstone's planted above it, etched with his name, his family line, and a single symbol, a lute. He'll be remembered, the embalmer says. That's what matters. But burial wasn't just about putting the body in the ground. There were protections to be made against the living. He leads you behind the tomb, where a pile of rubble has been arranged in deliberate shapes. Tomb traps, he says. Old tricks. Hidden pits, decoy coffins, sometimes even snakes. And it's true. Archaeological digs have uncovered tombs with false doors, spiked passages, and even jars filled with scorpion eggs. One theory suggests that elite tombs were booby-trapped to deter robbers. Another posits that curses painted in red ink and sealed with wax served as supernatural. Burglar alarms. You ask if the embalmer believes in curses. He grins. I believe in hungry priests, lazy guards, and gold that's too easy to steal. And yet, he adds a protective charm to the musician's tomb anyway, a wax figurine of Anubis, placed in a crevice, staring outward. Not everything is for the living to understand. You stand a moment longer, watching the sun slip below the horizon. The stars begin to blink alive, and the tomb blends into the sand. Just one among thousands. A life folded into the earth. His journey begins now, the embalmer says. You feel it too, that silent turning. The sense that something has left, yet something remains. You walk back with the embalmers in silence, each step crunching softly against the desert floor. Behind you, the wind smooths the sand, and soon no trace of the funeral remains except for memory. Night falls fully as you return to the workshop, but this time not to the preparation rooms. You're led into a low-ceilinged chamber carved deeper into the bedrock, walls etched with star patterns and jackals prowling beneath crescent moons. Here, the embalmers tend to the most curious of clients. Animals, yes, that's right. Mummification wasn't just for people. You think only humans deserved eternity? The embalmer asks, holding up a tightly wrapped bundle the size of a melon. He unrolls a layer, revealing a small, elongated skull-sharp snout, tiny fangs. Cat, he says, with a smile, temple offering. You're about to make a joke when he gestures to a set of shelves behind him. They're filled, completely. Dozens of bundles, each shaped like an animal, some long and slender, others coiled, some squat and round like sleeping dogs. Linen, resin, pigment, wax, feathers. You step closer and see rows labeled in ink: crocodile, ibis, baboon, ram, fish. Here's your mainstream fact. Animal mummification was deeply tied to Egyptian religion. Certain animals were considered sacred, direct manifestations of the gods themselves. Bastet was a lioness. Thoth took the form of an ibis. Anubis, of course, the jackal. To honor these gods, Egyptians mummified animals as offerings, messengers, or even spiritual companions. Some were buried with humans. Others were entombed in mass graves beneath temples. At Saqqara alone, archaeologists uncovered over 4 million ibis mummies. 4 million. That's not worship, that's devotion. On an industrial scale. You lean over a long linen bundle shaped like a coiled snake. Cobra, the embalmer nods. Guardian. They kept them in jars alive for rituals. When the time came, snap into the oil bath. You flinch. Better than some humans got, he adds dryly. Not all animal mummies were created equal. Some were pets' beloved companions, buried with their owners. One nobleman was entombed with his pet greyhound, wrapped in fine linen with a collar of lapis lazuli. The inscription read, "He runs by my feet forever." Others were commodified, bred specifically to be sacrificed. In one chamber at Tuna El Gabel, over 1 million mummified ibises were packed into shelves like ancient biological filing cabinets. It's believed they were bred, mummified, and sold as offerings purchased by pilgrims seeking divine favor. And here's your quirky fringe fact. Some of those animal mummies. Empty X-rays and CT scans have revealed fake mummies of feathers, bone fragments, even mud, all wrapped up convincingly in linen. Was it fraud? Resourcefulness? Were they symbolic representations of animals rather than actual corpses? Historians still argue whether these fakes were meant to deceive or simply substitute when supply fell short. One theory suggests used composite remains, stitching together parts from several animals to create a whole. An ancient taxidermy, REMIX. You follow the embalmer to a long table where 3 assistants are wrapping a small falcon. Its wings are folded tightly against its sides, its beak slightly open. For Horus, he says, this one will be taken to the cliff temple. He shows you how the wings are bound with red-dyed thread symbolizing rebirth through blood, how small lapis beads are tucked under each wing, so it can see both worlds, he whispers. You can't help but ask, did they believe that animals lived again, too? The embalmer tilts his head. If the gods walked among them, why not? In one alcove, you spot a crocodile at least 10 feet long, wrapped in dark linen, with an amulet of Sobek hanging from its jaws. The sheer effort of preparing such a beast speaks volumes. This wasn't just spiritual, it was spectacle, and beyond that mystery, one scholar's fringe theory claims certain animals were used in oracular rituals, mummified alive to trap divine breath. The longer the body lasted, the stronger the message. Superstition, the embalmer shrugs, or a forgotten science. You step back, taking it all in, the variety, the craftsmanship, the quiet reverence. Here were animals not just embalmed, but enshrined. Fur turned to parchment, wings stilled in prayer. The embalmer wraps the falcon's head and seals it with wax. Even the gods need companions, he says, and offerings remind them we remember. That hits different. Outside the chamber, the wind howls faintly through a carved vent. A desert dog barks in the distance. You realize you've begun to feel it, too, that ancient sense of connectedness, that in life and death, in flesh and linen, in bird and man, nothing was forgotten. The embalmer guides you to the threshold. Tomorrow, he says, we return to humans, but always remember, sometimes the gods came with feathers. You nod tonight. The silence of the animal dead feels just as heavy, just as holy. The next morning, you're ushered into a different wing of the embalming house, one quieter, older, lined with scrolls stacked like coiled snakes and fragments of parchment pressed between ivory boards. This is not a place for knives and hooks. This is the chamber of records and riddles. A hunched scribe waves you in. His fingers are stained with red and black ink, his eyelids heavy with sleep or wisdom. You've seen the work, he rasps. Now see the memory. He leads you to a long table where 3 mummies lie side by side. They're ancient even by ancient Egyptian standards. One is shrunken and blackened, another nearly perfect. The third looks like it got into a fight with time and lost. Not all mummies age gracefully, the scribe says, matter fact. Some succeed, others fail. And that's tonight's focus, what happened when things went wrong. You peer closer. The first mummy tight-skinned, glossy with resin, seems almost alive. Its teeth are intact, nails visible, even eyebrows preserved. This one was done with patience, the scribe nods. 70 days, 3 coats of resin, lotus oil 4. Sent, a priest of high station. Then he gestures to the second dot. It's a mess, bloating around the abdomen, wrappings rotted through. A sour, almost vinegary smell, even after all this time. Too much moisture, he mutters. Or bad natron. Maybe the tomb flooded. Or maybe it was political. Here's your mainstream fact. Even elite mummies could decay. Despite all the rites and rituals, mistakes happened. Embalming wasn't always precise, especially during times of war or economic collapse. Tomb robbing, rushed ceremonies, low quality. Materials any one of these could doom a mummy to rot. You're drawn to the third body. It's collapsed in on itself, wrappings peeling like old parchment. There are signs of scorching blackened areas across the chest and thighs. Overheated resin, the scribe says. Too hot when poured, cooked the flesh. A common mistake in the late periods when embalmers rushed the process. You wince. And here's the strange twist. Sometimes they did it on purpose. There's a fringe theory that in the Greco-Roman era, embalming became so commercialized that shortcuts were deliberate. Families paid for the deluxe package and received the budget bake. Resin-filled cavities, faces sealed shut, bodies crumbling within gilded masks. Historians still argue whether this was negligence or evolving belief, a shift from preservation to symbolism. You walk over to a cabinet where bundles of linen are labeled with names. Neferet, Jedha, Ponacht, each tells a different story. Some are tagged with prayers, others with curses. The scribe holds up a piece of cloth with writing in faded red ink. If you disturb me, may scorpions nest in your bed and vipers drink your water. That one worked, he chuckles. The man who opened her tomb was found a week later, barefoot, blinded, babbling. You raise an eyebrow. Coincidence, he shrugs, or karma. The records go deeper. He shows you scrolls describing mummy's buried face, down a punishment, perhaps. Others with their hands bound, mouths sealed with wax. Some had their names erased, the ultimate death in Egyptian thought. To lose your name was to vanish entirely from memory and afterlife alike. You learn of one case, a nobleman stripped of titles after death, his heart jar stolen, his body rewrapped with donkey hair, an insult beyond insult. The embalmer hated him, the scribe says. Or maybe the family did. Here's your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists in Thebes discovered a mummy sealed in a coffin far too small, legs broken, body bent double, no identifying marks, just a jar of wine and a loaf of bread. Lost soul, the scribe murmurs, or someone buried in haste. As you linger, it hits you. Even in death, inequality thrived. Some were laid to rest in gold, others folded like cargo. Some remembered, others forgotten. The afterlife, it seems, had a waiting list and a VIP lounge. The scribe opens a final drawer and hands you a tiny scroll. It's fragile, flaking at the edges. You can just make out a single line. If I am not remembered, then let my bones remember themselves. He says nothing. You place the scroll back carefully. As you leave, you look again at the three mummies. One intact, one spoiled, one scorched. Each one wanted eternity. Only one may get it. And just before the door closes behind you, the scribe adds softly, even gods decay. If no one speaks their names, the lesson clings to your bones. Preservation isn't guaranteed, not by oil, not by resin, not even by prayer. It's memory that endures. You step back into daylight, blinking against the brightness as if re-entering the world from beneath the earth. The embalmer joins you again, now dressed not in linen work robes, but in a clean white tunic, embroidered with gold thread. Time to meet the gods, he says, and the scientists wait. He leads you not into another tomb or workshop, but to a quiet space filled with strange, glowing boxes and softly humming tools. You realize, suddenly, you're no longer in the past. You're in the present, and the mummies are here too. This room belongs to the new embalmers, archaeologists, forensic specialists, radiologists, and molecular biologists. Instead of incense, the air smells faintly of antiseptic and static electricity. Instead of stone jars, there are X-ray machines. And on the table in front of you, a mummy, fresh from the vaults of time, now scanned, sliced virtually, and studied. Here's your mainstream fact. Modern science has revolutionized our understanding of mummification. Higher resolution CT scans, DNA sequencing, isotope analysis, and carbon dating have peeled back the wrappings without ever breaking a thread. One expert points at a digital image on a screen. It's a full 3D reconstruction of a mummy's structure, internal packing materials, amulets still resting near the heart. This one, she says, was a priest. You can see the spine curvature, likely a hunchback in life. Still had perfect teeth. You blink. This isn't just analysis. This is resurrection of biography, identity, story. She flips to another scan. A child, perhaps 5 years old, body wrapped carefully, a wooden toy lion placed under the arm. Preserved with care, she murmurs. Someone loved this little one deeply. You glance at the embalmer beside you, who watches silently. It's strange, he says. We prepared the bodies, but he nods to the scientists, they speak to the dead. Modern investigations have uncovered hidden amulets, tattoos, scarred bones, even arterial disease in mummies who lived thousands of years ago. Turns out the ancient Egyptians suffered from many of the same ailments we do: dental abscesses, arthritis, clogged arteries. One study even found signs of prostate cancer in a mummy over 2,000 years old. Eternity doesn't cure everything. And here's your quirky tidbit. One of the most famous mummy reconstructions, Nesamon, a priest from Thebes, was digitally given voice in 2020. Scientists used CT scans to rebuild his vocal tract and create a synthesized vowel sound. It's not much a sort of meh, but it's still the first time in history a mummy made noise again. Historians still argue whether it's respectful, exploitative, or simply the future of heritage. You watch as another researcher gently swabs a mummy's hand for DNA. We're close, she says. We may soon know hair color, skin tone, even hereditary diseases. We'll understand not just how they died, but how they lived. And yet, this progress comes with tension. Some traditionalists argue that science strips the sacred, that opening tombs, unwrapping corpses, even digitize, a modern desecration. Others insist it honors the dead to preserve their stories. You ask the embalmer how he feels about it. He smiles faintly. When I prepared the bodies, he says, I thought only of their journey. But now, I see we are also part of it. You, me, them. He points at the scientists. We all extend their life, through memory, through learning. On another table, a team is reconstructing a face, using skull scans and muscle modeling. They rebuild the features of a high-born woman buried with amulets, perfume, and a flute. Slowly, she emerges not as a corpse, but as a person. Lips, cheekbones, eyes. You gasp quietly. She looks like she's about to speak. That's the point, the technician says. Mummies aren't about death. They're about preserved presence. You step back, taking it all in. From obsidian blades and resin to CT scans and 3D printing, the care has changed, but the core has not. Humanity aching for permanence, hoping to be remembered, trying to cheat time just long enough to matter. Before you leave, the scientist hands you a vial-sealed glass containing a sample of linen fiber. This was pulled from a priest's wrappings, she says. Still smells faintly of cinnamon. You hold it. Just a thread. Just a smell. But that thread has survived 3,000 years. The embalmer touches your shoulder. Tomorrow, he says, we go back again, to where the ritual began, and we ask the old question. What question? He doesn't answer. Instead, he simply walks out. You follow, heart full of wonder and dust and data. The dead are speaking, and this time we're finally learning to listen. The embalmer meets you beneath a stone colonnade at sunrise, where shadows stretch like long fingers over the courtyard tiles. Today, he says, we return to the beginning not of the ritual, but of the myth. You follow him past the workshops, the tomb entrances, the drying rooms and sacred scrolls. He leads you to a modest shrine carved into the cliffside, older than any temple you've yet seen. On the walls, figures are painted in ochre and lapis, falcons, jackals, serpents, and one central figure lying on a bier, a man, green-skinned limbs, stiffened, surrounded by gods. Osiris. You know mummification, the embalmer says quietly. But do you know why? This is the heart of it, the origin myth behind Egypt's obsession with death, decay, and eternal return. Here's your mainstream fact. Osiris was the first mummy, according to Egyptian belief. A god-king, murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother, Set. His body scattered across the Nile. Isis, his sister-wife, retrieved the pieces, reassembled them, and breathed life back into him, not fully alive, not fully dead, but resurrected. He became ruler of the underworld, judge of the dead. Every embalming, the embalmer whispers, is an imitation of that myth. He gestures to the painted bier. The green skin means rebirth. He's not rotting, he's regenerating. You look more closely. Around Osiris's figure, tiny glyphs spiral outward like magical radiation prayers of transformation. Fragments of spells that embalmers once memorized like sacred songs. Every incision, every oil, every wrapping, the embalmer continues, is a reenactment of Isis's work. When we prepare the dead, we do as she did. We restore, we heal, we make the broken whole. But not everyone agreed. Here comes your scholarly debate. Did the Osiris myth shape mummification or emerge because of it? Some researchers argue the embalming practice predates the myth, evolving first out of practical preservation in desert graves. Others believe the myth came first, an archetypal framework that gave spiritual legitimacy to what would otherwise be seen as gruesome. Historians still argue whether the myth drove the ritual, or the ritual created the myth to explain itself. You look to the next panel. Isis's wings spread, hovering above the mummy of Osiris. Her breath becomes wind, her words spells. It's not medicine. It's resurrection by love. You step into the shrine's inner sanctum, where the air grows stiller, denser. Here lies a replica of Osiris's resting body, a ceremonial mummy placed in the chamber every year during the Koyak festival, when priests reenacted the god's burial. Rituals were performed over 11 days, wrapping, anointing, mourning. Symbolic tombs were filled with grain that would sprout, showing Osiris's body reborn through green shoots. One fringe theory suggests the early use of green face paint on some mummies was not aesthetic, it was divine mimicry. A way of saying, this is not a dead man, this is Osiris reborn. You kneel beside the replica and feel, not fear, but quiet reverence. even in decomposition. The embalmer says there is divinity. Osiris didn't defeat death by escaping it. He passed through it and ruled beyond. That's the true mystery of mummification. It isn't preservation for vanity, it's transformation, a sacred alchemy. Something dies, something endures. He opens a small jar near the altar. Inside, soil mixed with barley. He hands you a few grains. Plant these, he says. They were once inside a wrapped body, now they grow. You hold the seeds, and they feel warm despite the morning chill. Later, as you exit the shrine, you see more connections everywhere. A jackal-shaped rock formation along the ridge. A bird call that echoes like a priest's chant. Even the wind seems to speak in layered syllables. The embalmer says nothing more. He simply places a hand on your shoulder and nods. But you understand. Now, every mummy you've seen is a retelling of Osiris. Every embalmer, a priest of Isis. Every linen strip, a prayer to hold the pieces together of a body, of a person, of memory. It makes you wonder, maybe the afterlife isn't just a place. Maybe it's a story you're sewn into, a myth that carries you, even when your name is dust. The embalmer calls it the last test. You follow him down a narrow staircase, half choked with sand and time, until the air becomes so dry it feels brittle. Torchlight flickers ahead. You hear water, but it's not a stream. It's the sound of something dripping, echoing across stone. You've arrived at the simulation chamber artificial underworld, built as part of the priestly training complex. A practice duot, a place to rehearse the journey the soul must take once the body is sealed in linen and buried in the West. Carved into the walls are monstrous beings with twisted limbs and names that should never be spoken aloud after sunset. There are lakes of fire, giant serpents, portals guarded by lion-headed sentries, and in the center, a model of the Hall of Two Truths, the Judgment Chamber of Osiris. You stand before the weighing scale. Here's your mainstream fact in Egyptian belief. After death, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Mat. Truth, balance, order. If your heart was light, you passed into paradise. If it was heavy with guilt, you were consumed by Amit, the soul devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. A cosmic garbage disposal for unworthy hearts. The embalmer gestures to the left pan of the scale, where a featheran actual ostrich plume rests gently in place. On the right, a stone heart scarab carved from green jasper. This, he says, is how they tested their conscience, but also how we tested our work. How so, you ask? He points to a stone tablet nearby. It lists 42 scenes, the negative confessions. I have not stolen. I have not cursed the gods. I have not made others weep. I have not polluted the Nile. These were recited by the dead, not to admit guilt, but to deny it. It wasn't just about living a good life, the embalmer says. It was about being able to declare it, loudly, proudly, in front of gods. One priest, he tells you, was buried with a scroll that simply read, I regret everything. Let me try again. Fringe scholars argue this wasn't a confession, but a challenge to the gods, a plea for reincarnation or cosmic mercy. Others claim it was sarcasm. The ancient world had its share of existential comedians. You move deeper into the chamber. The walls now show scenes of the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, eternal harvests, rivers teeming with fish, trees heavy with fruit, families reunited, pets restored, beer that never ran dry, a sort of golden, unending afternoon. It's beautiful, but not easy to reach. The journey through the Duat was perilous. 12 gates, fire lakes, inverted rivers, and a boat, the solar bark, where Ra battled the serpent Apophis every night to be reborn each dawn. The deceased had to hitch a ride, sneak past monsters, and answer riddles from gods with crocodile heads. Imagine trying to pass your final exam with the threat of being eaten by a mythological chimera if you miss a question. Historians still argue whether the Book of the Dead was literal instruction or symbolic myth. Some believe it was like a checklist. Have you packed your scarabs? Do you know the name of the third gatekeeper at the fourth river? Others think it was more psychological, a blueprint for transformation of the soul through fire, fear, and memory. The embalmer shows you a final chamber filled with statues of Osiris, Mat, and Anubis. He kneels beside the largest figure, Osiris, seated, green-faced, holding crook and flail. We guide them here, he says softly, but we never follow. You realize the embalmers who knew the journey better than anyone were not given the same ceremonial passage. They were necessary, but not honored in the same way. Tainted, some believed, by their proximity to the dead. Powerful, but feared. It's an irony that stings. He leads you to a doorway sealed in stone. This is where we stop, he says. Beyond is mystery. No one returns. You run your hand across the door. It's covered in prayers, scratched, painted, even blood-marked. Some are shaky, desperate. One says only, I wait here. It's humbling. The mummification process, the salt, the hooks, the wrapping, the rituals, has all led to this moment. A journey not of the body, but of the soul. From here on, the dead walk alone. You and the embalmer step back. Behind you, the torchlight flickers out one by one. The chamber fades into shadow, but before it vanishes, you glance once more at the scale. The feather still floats. The heart still waits, and you hear, maybe not with your ears, but with something deeper. I have not forgotten the names of my ancestors. I have not let my heart speak lies. I am made whole. I am remembered. The door remains shut, but the path endures. You're not sure how long you've been walking. The embalmer is silent now, and the path winds upward, away from the underworld simulation, into the desert air. The sun is setting, the horizon a deep band of red and gold. For a moment, you could almost believe you're in the afterlife already. This might be the field of reeds, just without the endless beer jugs. But as you crest a dune, you see something unexpected. A marketplace, yes, a real, bustling open-air bazaar only. This one deals in death. Papyrus scrolls with funerary prayers flutter on strings. Little Anubis statues, some carved in gold, others painted on bits of broken pottery. Amulets of every kind, scarabs, jed pillars, tie at knots, tiny falcons lay on tables like candy. Artisans chant spells as they sew tiny shrouds for animal offerings. And at one stall, a scribe is advertising custom Book of the Dead chapters. Limited edition. Ask about the crocodile discount. Death was a business, the embalmer says, effect. Not just sacred, lucrative. Here's your mainstream fact. Mummification was part of a thriving industry in ancient Egypt. By the New Kingdom and late period, dozens of trades supported the mortuary. World scribes, potters, woodworkers, painters, oil merchants, linen weavers, tomb decorators, even professional mourners. If you had coin, death could be deluxe. You pass a man carving a coffin long and narrow, painted with bright yellows and blues. Cedar from Lebanon, he says proudly, imported. Smells like afterlife with a hint of citrus. Further down, a woman is mixing perfumed resin in a bowl while reciting a protection spell. You can't rush these, she says, or the soul gets lost in the tunnels. She gives you a wink. Happens more often than you think. The embalmer leans close. Not all of this was spiritual, he says. There were scams, tricks. Some sold fake amulets. Others used recycled coffins. One group got caught embalming with cooking oil. Yes, that really happened. Some mummies from the later periods were so poorly preserved that modern scientists found evidence of vegetable oil and dirt instead of sacred resins. Imagine paying for eternity and getting salad dressing instead. And here's your quirky tidbit. There were even DIY mummification kits. Okay, not quite like a craft set, but some families did keep tools at home, linen scraps. Small jars of natron, even instructions written out by priests. These were used for wrapping relics, animal offerings, or minor funerals when full embalming wasn't feasible. Death, it seems, came with options. Historians still argue whether this commercialization weakened the sanctity of mummification or simply made it more accessible. Was it sacrilege or democracy in death? You pass a booth where a boy is painting a cartonnage mask. He uses delicate strokes to recreate a serene face, the eyes outlined in kohl, the lips curved slightly upward. For my grandfather, he says. He liked to smile. The embalmer watches silently. Even in the chaos, some still believe. You're struck by the tension of it all. The sacred and the economic. Divine rituals sold like souvenirs. You think of modern funeral homes, insurance plans, urn catalogs. Maybe we haven't changed all that much. He takes you into a quieter corner of the market, where an old woman sits behind a small shrine. She offers to tell your name's meaning. Write it in glyphs and whisper it over a flame so it can be heard by the Duat. You don't pay her, but she does it anyway. Now you'll be remembered. She says, you feel a strange comfort in that. The embalmer gestures to a nearby tent. Inside, rows of coffins line the walls, each painted and priced. We choose here. He says, rich, poor, priest, farm of everyone lies down in the same direction. You notice that none of them are labeled for kings or for peasants. Just names, lives, echoes. Some are tiny children, others wide, perhaps families buried together. One coffin is marked with a faded glyph, meaning one who had no tomb. A wanderer in death, finally given shelter. Outside, the sun dips beneath. The horizon, the marketplace begins to close. Candles flicker. Smoke rises from small braziers burning offerings to Osiris. The desert wind picks up again, and everything the trade, the sacred, the scammy and sincere begins to fade into shadow. The embalmer turns to you. Tomorrow, you see what happens when memory dies. You raise a brow. Isn't that what mummification prevents? He looks away. Not always. The desert whispers. The amulets glimmer in their cloth pouches. And somewhere, not far from here, a body lies in linen, and has already been forgotten. The wind is stronger today. Grit stings your skin as you trek across an empty stretch of desert, far beyond the tombs and temples. No tourists, no merchants, no chance, just you, the embalmer, and a horizon that seems to swallow sound itself. This is where memory fails, he says. You arrive at what looks like a collapsed dune, but as you step closer, you see stone-worn, broken, half swallowed by sand. The remains of a tomb. The entrance is caved in. The lintel lies cracked, the inscriptions barely legible. A few shattered pottery shards peek from the dust like teeth. And near the rubble, something even stranger, loose foot wrapped in linen, blackened by sun. You recoil instinctively. The embalmer doesn't flinch. This was once a person, he says softly. Now a relic, forgotten, unnamed. Here lies the other half of mummification's story. What happens when the ritual fails, or worse, when it is erased? He crouches near the tomb and begins brushing away the sand with a reed whisk. A faded cartouche emerges, chipped through the center. You can just make out the first sign of a name in. Maybe meant to, but the rest is gone. Name destroyed, the embalmer says. Body exposed. Burial looted. This one's eternity was interrupted. Here's your mainstream fact. Tomb robbing was a huge problem in ancient Egypt, not just for gold, but for linen, oils, even amulets. During famines and regime collapse, embalmers themselves sometimes sold corpses back to grieving families multiple times, rewrapping the same mummy with recycled prayers. But this is worse. This one, he says, was condemned. You ask why. He simply gestures to the wall. The glyphs are scratched out, not eroded, deliberately defaced. Someone took a chisel and hacked through every image of the man's face, every occurrence of his name, eyes gouged out, cartouches obliterated. Even the god figures flanking his tomb have been scarred. He was cursed, the embalmer says, not by the gods, by the living. This is damnatio memoria, the ancient practice of erasing a person from memory, more feared than execution, because death ends a life, but erasure ends a soul. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians believed your soul continued to exist only as long as your name was spoken. Without it, you faded into oblivion. No paradise, no rebirth, just disintegration. So enemies didn't just kill, they unwrote you, and it worked. Even now, thousands of years later, this person lies anonymous, a wrapped body, partially uncovered by time, with no record to tie it to life. Historians still argue whether this was punishment for treason, theft, heresy, or simply a political move. One theory suggests this tomb belonged to a high official who supported the wrong pharaoh. Another says it was a priest accused of blasphemy. The truth lost with the name. The embalmer kneels beside the exposed foot. He pulls a strip of linen from his satchel and gently wraps it again. He still deserves peace, he says, even if the world forgot. You feel the weight of it then, how fragile eternity really is. How much of it depends, not on the rituals, the jars, or even the body, but on memory, legacy, the echo of a name. You look around the dunes and wonder, how many others lie here, forgotten, unburied, unspoken, not mummified in marble museums, but scattered, their songs unheard. He stands and begins walking. You follow, quieter now. Eventually, you reach another tomb, less damaged but still half buried. The embalmer leads you inside. Dust clings to every surface. The coffin is intact, painted but faded. The face mask cracked, and beside it, a stack of books of the dead, torn, burned. During foreign rule, he says, temples were raided, sacred texts destroyed, embalmers executed. For a time, we stopped rapping. We buried our dead in silence. Here's a fringe theory. Some embalmers smuggled mummies out of Egypt during invasions, hoping they'd be safer abroad. Others buried mummified scrolls in secret chambers, believing that words could be resurrected, even if the body could not. You kneel and brush dust from a name carved into the coffin's footboard. It's still legible. Hekamank. Magic is life. The embalmer smiles faintly. He believed it. We all did. As you step out into the evening sun, you feel the shift in the air, not just heat, but sorrow. The kind of sorrow that comes from knowing how little time remembers, how many names were never written down, how many hearts weighed, passed, and vanished. And yet, even here in ruin, there's something defiant. A body still clings to its linen. A cartouche, half destroyed, still whispers a syllable. A foot, gently rewrapped, insists, I mattered. You walk in silence with the embalmer as stars begin to rise. The dead fear only one thing, he says. Not pain, not judgment, oblivion. And as you look out across the blackening desert, you vow to remember the name you saw, even if no one else ever will. You awaken before dawn, startled not by sound, but by silence. It's thick, denser than the darkness itself. The embalmer stands, waiting just beyond the threshold of your chamber, a small lantern swaying in his hand. There's one more you must meet, he says. A mummy unlike the rest. You follow him out across the cold sand. The sky hasn't yet broken, still soaked in ink, constellations piercing the black like blade tips. This isn't a path you've taken before. You're walking away from the temples, the workshops, even the tombs, towards something older, something stranger. Eventually you reach a cliff wall with a narrow crack in it, barely wide enough to slip through. The embalmer leads the way, ducking into shadow. The air grows cooler, tighter. You step into a passage that feels alive, like lungs holding breath, and then you enter the chamber. It's carved directly into the rock, unmarked on the outside, but inside it's magnificent. Gilded walls covered in constellations and swirling deities. Obsidian floors polished to a mirrored sheen. At the center lies a single sarcophagus, jet black, carved from basalt, inlaid with gold and lapis. This, the embalmer says quietly, is the forgotten sorcerer. You stare. That's not a title you expected. Sorcerer, he nods. Not a king, not a priest, not a warrior. A man of forbidden knowledge, preserved in secret, studied by no one, named by none. Here's your mainstream fact. Magic, or Heka, was central to ancient Egyptian belief. More than just tricks or spells, it was considered a divine force used by the gods to create the universe, and by humans to maintain it. Pharaohs had court magicians, temples had libraries of spells, even tomb workers kept charms against scorpion bites and sunstroke. But this man, this sorcerer, was something else. The embalmer brushes dust from the sarcophagus lid. Glyphs flicker in the lantern light. Unlike traditional inscriptions, these aren't prayers or titles. They're warnings. Let none disturb the vessel of knowledge. May silence bind what words once summoned. He who is unwrapped is unmade. Why preserve him at all? You ask. The embalmer hesitates. Because knowledge, like the dead, deserves to sleep. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some fringe. Scholars believe that certain mummies, those buried outside of royal or priestly traditions, were embalmed not for their journey to the afterlife, but to bind what was within them. Knowledge too dangerous, power too immense. There are whispered tales of cursed scrolls buried in flesh. of spells inked directly onto organs, of embalmers who wept as they sealed the linen. Historians still argue whether these were real individuals or mythic fabrications, but this tomb, it's real. You're standing in it, and something about the air feels charged. You step forward. The lid bears no face, no cartouche, just a faint spiral at the center. Your fingertips brush it, and a shiver runs up your spine. He was mummified differently, the embalmer murmurs. No amulets, no canopic jars, no prayers of safe passage, just binding seals. Every limb tied, every fold locked, each layer packed with natron soaked in ink and crushed hematite. Why ink? To erase him, to make him blank. The idea sends a chill through your bones. This was no journey to the field of reeds. This was containment. You ask if they ever opened. Him, the embalmer's eyes darken. Once, centuries ago, during the droughts, a priest-king broke the seal. The story says the temple walls bled for 3 days. The king died screaming, and the mummy was resealed by the embalmer's descendants. Hidden, forgotten, he sighs. We keep him because we must. You circle the sarcophagus. Behind it lies a shallow alcove, and inside a small statue of Thoth, the god of writing and knowledge. But his eyes have been chiseled out, defaced, unseeing. You whisper the question you're almost afraid to ask. Do you think his soul still lingers? The embalmer looks at the stone. Some souls move on, others stay curious. A quiet sound rises from the sarcophagus then. Not movement, not wind, a whisper you spin. But it's gone. The embalmer kneels and begins a chant, low and rhythmic. He traces the spiral on the lid, once clockwise, then counterclockwise. You sense not fear but unease, like standing too close to a sleeping lion. The sorcerer isn't dangerous because he's awake. He's dangerous because he might remember. This mummy, the embalmer says finally, was not meant for eternity. He was meant for silence. And sometimes, that's the only way to protect. The living, you nod, unsure if you're convinced or terrified. You turn to leave. The embalmer lingers a moment longer, pressing his palm to the stone. Sleep, he whispers. Let knowledge lie still. You emerge back into the rising sun. The heat is familiar now. The light is welcome, but something of the dark clings. To you, not evil, not horror, just the reminder that even among those who mastered death, some stories were never meant to be told. You return to the workshop courtyard with dust still clinging to your robes and something less visible hanging in the air, a weight, the kind that only comes after glimpsing something immense, unknowable and possibly forgotten for a reason. The embalmer says nothing as he walks, but his pace is slower now, thoughtful. We've preserved the body, he says at last. We've sealed the soul. But there's one thing left we can't preserve, not with natron, not with resin, not even with spells. He turns to you. Memory, the courtyard is scattered with bundles, mummified scrolls, cracked canopic jars, bits of linen swept into corners like autumn leaves. The workshop is closing, not just for the day, but forever. This was once one of the greatest embalming houses in Thebes. He tells you, sweeping his hand toward the stone columns. We preserved nobles, priests, even one foreign queen. But when the Nile shifted, and the pharaohs stopped building tombs here, the families stopped coming, and memory faded. You walk through the rooms that once bustled with ritual. The wrapping tables are still. The hooks hung neatly on the wall, glint dully in the morning light. But they haven't been used in years. There's no one left to remember the songs, he says. No one to recite the negative confessions. No one to press amulets into the folds of linen and whisper a name over flame. Here's your mainstream fact. Many embalming houses, once central to Egyptian society and vanished by the Roman period. Some were abandoned, others converted into shrines, storehouses, even homes. The art of embalming dwindled until it was little more than a curious ritual, its deeper meaning obscured by centuries of change and conquest. And yet, some knowledge survived. In the most unlikely of places, he brings you to a sealed cabinet. Inside, fragments of papyri, each labeled, catalogued, and stored with care. Some are prayer scrolls, others are receipts CS, actual itemized receipts from embalmers to families, detailing costs for oils, linen, and burial rites. Here's your quirky tidbit. One scroll even contains a customer complaint. The handwriting is furious. The client accused the embalmers of using sour oils and demanded a partial refund. If my uncle cannot smell sweetly in the afterlife, it reads, then his ghost will haunt your house. He laughs. We didn't honor the dead out of fear, but it did help keep the standards high. You carefully examine one scroll. It's brittle, but the ink still sings slanted lines of hieratic script, a lullaby to the dead. You wonder, how many stories are trapped here? How many names once spoken aloud, now reduced to glyphs and guesswork? Historians still argue whether embalming was ever a truly standardized science or a sacred improvisation, half ritual, half response. Was every body treated the same way? Were secrets kept by each family line? Some embalmers, it's said, wrote their own spells, custom incantations that died with them. The embalmer now unlocks a final drawer. Inside rests something fragile, folded in layers of soft cloth. He unwraps it gently, revealing a single unwrapped mummy hand still intact, delicate fingers curled slightly inward, the nails painted with faint red ochre. A ring sits on one finger, turquoise cracked by time. This, he says, was my ancestor's. He was the last to embalm in this house before the sacred order dissolved. He couldn't save the whole body, but he kept the hand to remember you. Ask him why, he shrugs. Because it was the hand that wrote names, the hand that placed charms, the hand that held the hearts of the dead. He offers it to you not to touch, just to see, and it's beautiful in its way. Not grotesque, not terrifying, just enduring. That's when you understand. Mummification was never about fear of death. It was about defiance, a refusal to vanish, a quiet rebellion against time. The embalmer rewraps the hand and places it back in the drawer. One day, he says, this house will turn to sand, but someone will find the scrolls, the tools, maybe even my name. He looks at you, eyes tired but calm. Maybe that someone is you. You leave the workshop as the sun climbs higher. The wind blows through the columns like breath through a flute. You look back once, at the doorway half-shadowed Nawand. You imagine the souls of the mummified, drifting above in currents of gold and fire, waiting to be remembered. You walk down the hill, past tombs, sealed and open, past carts and stone, markers and prayer flags fluttering weakly. You think about names, about the power of being remembered, and you whisper, just once, the name from the scroll you saw in the ruined tomb, Heka-M-Ankh. The The wind catches it, carries it. Maybe that's enough. Night falls once more, and the stars above you gleam like polished gemstones scattered across black velvet. You sit on a smooth stone ledge overlooking the Nile, its currents slow and silver in the moonlight. The embalmer is beside you again, his linen cloak pulled tight against the cooling air. "This is where it ends," he says. "Not in the tomb, not in the ceremony, but here." You look around. No sarcophagi, no scrolls, just quiet. "The body," he continues, "was preserved. The soul guided. But the true goal of mummification was always this continuity, not of flesh, not even of spirit, but of story." He hands you a small object, smooth, dark, and warm from his palm. It's a scarab amulet, carved from obsidian. On its underside, a name is etched in minute, looping script. "Whose name?" you ask. "Does it matter?" He replies, "As long as it's spoken." Here's your final mainstream fact. Scarabs were more than jewelry. They were anchors for identity, placed near the heart, under tongues, inside fists. They carried spells, names, affirmations. Some were personalized, others mass-produced. But all of them whispered the same thing. "Let me be remembered." The embalmer stands. We've unwrapped bodies, walked through salt and shadow, faced gods, monsters, mistakes. But now, we ask the last question. You nod, knowing what's coming. Did they succeed? Did the ancient Egyptians, through 3,000 years of trial and error, myth and ritual, truly defeat death? Did all their oils and scrolls and sacred architecture buy them eternity? Here's your final scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether mummification achieved its goal. Some say it was an illusion. Most names are lost, most tombs plundered, most beliefs overtaken by time. Others claim the very fact that we're talking about them now, naming them, pondering them as proof they won. After all, death may silence breath, but it cannot silence memory. You gaze out across the desert, thinking of the scrolls tucked into bandages, the cats buried beside priests, the humble onion tucked into a chest cavity for reasons no one can fully explain. You remember the musicians, gentle face beneath linen, and the gold-tipped fingers still curled to play. You recall the sorcerer's tomb, sealed in fear, yet still here, and you remember the forgotten foot in the sand, rewrapped with care, if only to give it one last shred of dignity. Maybe mummification didn't guarantee paradise, but it fought for it, fought with linen and salt and words carved into walls, fought with names whispered across centuries, fought with faith that someday someone you might come along and see all of it and understand. The embalmer sits beside you again, looking up at the sky. "You know what the stars are?" he asks. You shake your head. "Souls that found the way." He closes his eyes, and so your journey ends, not with a final breath, but with a question still echoing through the sand, through the stone, through the folds of time. If your name were wrapped in linen, who would unwrap it? You hold the scarab tight, and in the silence, you speak the name again. Not just for them, but for all of us. The embalmer has long since gone. The torchlight has faded, and the air grows still, like linen settling around the edges of a coffin. Your eyes feel heavy now, lulled by the rhythm of footsteps through sacred halls, the whisper of prayers layered into fabric, the cool hush of desert tombs where the dead sleep gently, folded into time. Let your breath slow with theirs. Let your thoughts float light as a feather on matte scales. Picture the quiet dark of the tomb, not as an end, but as a seed planted in stillness. Picture the soul rising like a bird, wings of turquoise and gold, soaring through the halls of night. No fear, no hurry, just silence, full and warm. Think of the embalmer's hand steady, patient guiding a broken thing into wholeness again. Think of the names once carved, forgotten, remembered, whispered again. Maybe your name too will be spoken far into the future. Maybe your story, wrapped carefully in memory, will survive long after your footprints have blown away. There is no hurry to eternity, no fear in stillness, only waiting, only remembering, only rest. Let the linen settle now, gently. Let the incense burn low. The body has been preserved. The soul has been weighed. The door has been closed, not in loss, but in peace. And you've seen what lies beyond. So now, sleep, softly, deeply, like a king in the west.